Next, if I could ask, now that we know that you guys can hear and you can talk, if you could please mute yourself. I will ask you to unmute at various times throughout the webinar, and that will happen for all of our webinars. Whenever we have these, there will be times to come off of mute, be able to talk, and then we'll ask you to go back on mute. Myself and Emma and Becky are here as facilitators. I will be basically heading up today's webinar. Emma will head up the next webinar. Becky will head up the third webinar. So I will be basically facilitating what we're going to talk about today. You'll hear a little bit from these guys. I see two of you have said that you're going to have to leave the webinar. That's okay. This is going to be recorded and put up in the Moodle course. The PowerPoint that I'm going to use is also going to be put up in the Moodle course. So you'll have access to that as we go today. So with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. All right, so what I'm trying to do here is get back over into Zoom so that I can share this with you guys. There we go. Now, welcome to the course, Creating Engagement, Learning and Networking Online. This is part 1. We have part 2 coming up next week. I think most of you have signed up for that. If you have not, please let NeighborWorks know that you would like to sign up for that. They're handling all the registration for all of these things. Along the way, as I said, you are going to be hearing from different people, but we're going to have courses that are going to tie us together that are inside of Moodle. And so that's kind of also where we're heading. Now, as I mentioned, we are going to be leveraging chat. And I would actually like you to practice with chat right now. So what I'd like to see from you guys, if you can, is for you to open up chat and just type in chat where in the country you are coming to us from. All right, where do you actually live? Let's make sure everybody can use chat. Awesome. Oh, California, Maryland, DC, Florida. Wow, all over the place. Very nice, very nice. I am in Colorado. Oh, Roderick's in Boulder. Very good. I'm just down the hill in Littleton. So very good. Okay, good. So you guys know how to use chat. That's awesome. So at various times today, I'm going to be asking you to type some things in chat. We're going to be leveraging them in some engagement activities and some things that are going to ask you guys to share some of your expertise with us. I'd like to do that right off the bat with something that I want to, an exercise that I'd like to try that talks about learning. Since this webinar and this course is about learning and how people learn and how we can utilize different modalities for learning, I really want to engage you guys today by talking about what learning really is and, quite honestly, what learning really is not. So to that end, I have 3 questions that I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you these questions very fast. All right, as soon as I ask you the first question, I'd like you to type the answer in chat. As soon as I start to see people typing the answer in chat, I'll move on to the second question. When I see people starting to answer that question, I'll move on to the third question, and then I'll tell you why we did this, okay? So what I'd like you to do, please, is type in chat which of the 2 items that you see on the screen is larger. Just type the word of the 2 items on the screen, which one is larger? Very good. Second question, if these 2 items cost $1.10 between them, and the bat is $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Go ahead and type that in the chat. How much does the ball cost? All right, and the third question, I'm actually not going to ask you, there is no third question. I tricked you a little bit, all right? And I tricked you because I wanted you really in that mode of moving quickly and moving rapidly. And the reason that I wanted you to see that is because almost all of you, in fact, I think all of you answered that second question incorrectly. See, If the ball and the bat cost $1.10 and the bat costs $1 more than the ball, then the ball costs 5 cents and the bat costs $1.05, making it $1 more. Now, the reason that most of you said 10 cents is because your brain does not want to think. Now, that's not because of you as an individual, that's because you're human. Our brains desire to be efficient. Our brains desire to do things as quickly and rapidly and expeditiously as possible, and thinking is not one of those things. And so therefore I said, hey, there's 2 items, $1.10, one's $1 more, what's it gonna be? Oh, easy, 10 cents. But that's not true. And if you had stopped and paused and really thought about it, then you probably would have gotten the answer correctly. So as we start thinking about learning, we have to be aware that our learners really have organs inside their heads that don't want to learn. Nobody wants to learn. Sometimes we trick ourselves into learning. Sometimes we engage ourselves with things that are extraneous to learning, and therefore we learn as a result of it. But nobody really wants to learn. All right, so sometimes we're going to have to get around that. You're going to hear from 3 of us over the course of the next couple of weeks in these courses, in these webinars, with regard to learning, with regard to engagement, with regard to how to handle utilizing the web and webinars and Zooms and classes as we go. I am really, really excited to introduce to you Becky, Emma, and myself. I'm going to let them introduce themselves so you get to hear from them first. So Becky, could you come off mute and just say hi to everybody?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to meet you all, and so happy you're here joining us. So my name is Becky Shiring, and I'm joining you with a background in adult education and also instructional technology. And I have spent most of my career, working with educators on how to better implement technology tools in the classroom. And also supporting students and teachers in their efforts in using things like Moodle, for example, which will be our course management system.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky. You guys are going to get some really cool tools from her in the 3rd webinar for some stuff out there on the web. Emma, can you come off mute and say hi, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I had to call in because my computer was having audio issues, but we learned to adapt, and we'll talk about that today a little bit too. So I'm Emma Zone. I live in Katy, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston, and I have spent my career both as an educator across the P-12 system, the community college system, and the university system, as both an associate professor and also as an educational administrator as a vice provost. I've also worked at an educational technology company. I helped found that company, and now I am a consultant working with all different types of learners across the country. But like Becky, have spent a large part of my career focusing on that sort of intersection of technology and how we learn best and how to help people kind of come together as teams in a collaborative manner. So happy to spend the week with you all, hopefully next week too, and I'm glad to have you here. So nice to meet you.
Thanks, Emma. And my name is Jeff Borden. I got my doctorate here in Denver a number of years ago, and that's where I live today. I also have been working in P through 20 education for my entire career, mostly higher ed. I'm a professor of communication and of education courses. I sort of specialize in neuroscience as well as e-learning. And I'm anxious to be able to share some of those elements of communication and education with you as we go through some of the stuff today. So we are going to spend approximately 2 weeks together for most of you, I think. And I think you'll start to get a sense of who we are, and we will certainly get a sense of who you are. And so with that in mind, let me just talk about what the courses that are going on. This course is creating engagement, learning, and networking online, and it's part 1. We're going to have part 2 next week. So for those of you that are doing this, just please note, there's a webinar at the start and there's a webinar at the end of this first course. Next week, there will be a webinar at the start, but not at the end. So there's a total of 3 webinars that go with the 2 courses that will happen over these 2 weeks. At the same time, we've got a couple of other things that we're building out for NeighborWorks, a library of assets and some stuff like that, which includes some other kinds of webinars potentially. They're talking to us about some other courses and some other things that may happen after this engagement is done. So we'll see how all of that goes. With that said, let's talk about where we're going today, all right? Today, I'd like to talk to you really about three things. I want to talk about people and learning, which we've already started a little bit. I want to talk about poise and confidence, and we'll talk about purpose and outcome. As we do that over the course of about the next 50 minutes or so, hopefully you'll get a really good sense of how we intend to not only approach these courses, but how you can start to approach your courses that you're teaching for NeighborWorks, whether that's in a Zoom modality or in a course like Moodle LMS kind of modality as we go. And ultimately, all of this stuff does translate into the face-to-face experiences that I know everybody likes and desires and craves, but obviously in this COVID context, we're not having that for a little while. So hopefully this gets us to a place where we can talk through all of the right stuff. Let's start by talking about people and learning. I don't know how many of you saw the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. It's this movie. I hope I'm not ruining it for you. I hope, you know, if you haven't seen it, you're not planning to. But it's this movie where he gets lost. He's flying on a flight for I think UPS overseas, and their plane goes down. And he's the only survivor. And he is stuck on this island by himself for about 7 years. Well, there's this really pivotal moment in the movie where he finally decides he's going to try to get off of this island, even though it could likely kill him. He's fashioned a bit of a raft, but in order to really get the sail working the way he wants to, he's going to need all of the vines that he's created over time. And unfortunately, one of the vines is up at the top of this mountain, and he doesn't want to go back up there because of the memories of what he did with that vine last time he was up there. He had considered hanging himself. Now, it didn't work and it didn't happen, and he was just in this utter depression. But it's this very poignant, monumental moment in the movie because he has to climb back up to the top of this rock and get this vine that he's going to now use to try to rescue himself. And as an audience, if you're watching the movie, you're thinking, wow, this is so emotional and so poignant, so meaningful. But that's not actually what was happening when they filmed this. See, perception definitely determines reality, and this can really be seen in this particular scene because what we see in the screen is not what everybody saw when they were filming this. See, that's the backlot that they actually saw as they were filming that scene. Then they CGI'd in the ocean back behind it. Perception really does sort of determine what you think of as reality. Now, it doesn't make it reality. It just means that that's reality to you. I can give you one example of that when it comes to learning. Think about who it was that taught you to take notes. Did anyone teach you to take notes? Most of the time when I have asked audiences about this, the answer to who taught you to take notes is, I don't know, or nobody, or I don't remember, or I've just always been told, hey, you should write this down. Well, most people in an educational context don't take notes correctly. We actually take notes quite improperly in ways that doesn't really help us remember. It doesn't help us learn, certainly, and that's really quite problematic. When most people take notes, they just write down words that are said out loud. That's not a good strategy for taking notes. If you want a good strategy for taking notes, a neuroscientist named Dr. Stephen Carroll recommends that you take notes in a formula, kind of like you see on the screen right now. That up in the upper right-hand corner of the page that you're writing, you put some metadata, you know, the date, the time, that sort of thing. But then on the left-hand side, you put connections. How do you feel about this? What other learning can you tie this to? And you write it in as few words as possible. You write it in 1 word or 2 words or 3 words to try to just trigger the brain to start to go in and try to remember what it was that was said. Now, there's a key, and the right side is that key. On the right side, you then want to draw a doodle or a little sketch or a little drawing of what that might look like. Now, immediately, when I usually say this to audiences, people go, well, I can't draw, I'm out. That's actually better. It's better if you can't draw, It's better for your brain. It's better for remembering, because you have to sort of force yourself to think, okay, what does this crude drawing actually mean? And how does it dovetail with what I wrote over there? At the end of the experience, you want to write down near the bottom, what's the aha? What really matters here? Why did you do this? And if you really want bang for your buck, you want to go back and study that about 24 hours after you wrote it in the first place. In fact, if you do it just before you go to bed, you'll usually remember between 11 and 14% more of the information than you would otherwise. Now that's a brain science-based way to take notes. This is so influential to myself and my wife, who's also a teacher by trade. She got her master's in education. We have used this with our daughter over her career. She's now 13, but we have used this at various points with her just to remember stuff around history, stuff about geography, stuff around all sorts of things. This was something she had written down when she was about 6 or 7 years old. And when she would go back and study these things, she remembers some of the things she has studied forever. She's never lost them because this note-taking technique is so solid. So again, I go back and I ask you to think about, who was it that taught you to take notes? For most of us, the answer is, well, we were kind of left to our own devices. That leads me to this quote that I really love by Dan Pink, who wrote the book Drive, which is all about motivation. But he says that there is a significant gap between what scientists know about how our brains work and what an organizational behaviorist will tell you that we do. Now, this is not just true in business, this is true in school, this is true in training, this is true in workshops. We don't use what we know about the brain, we use what we were taught. We use what we've seen, what we've experienced, and often what we've experienced is not ideal. It's not great. So think about that for a second. Think about what it is to learn something. If you were to define learning, what would you say? Put that in the chat if you can. How would you define learning? Anybody have any thoughts or ideas? All right, explaining something to someone else, gaining knowledge, very good. Deciding to change, oh, I like that, Val. I like that a lot. Absorbing and using information, good, good. Incorporating new information, good. All right, now, let me take what you have written here and let's dovetail it with the traditional definition of learning. This is, if you were to just Google learning, you would see something that looked like this. And it kind of aligns with some of the stuff you've said. Learning is to acquire knowledge or have a skill in something by studying it, by experiencing it, or by being taught. That's a basic definition for learning. My problem with this definition, and maybe some of you have the same problem, is that this definition is very transactional. It suggests that one thing happens and therefore learning takes place. That's not how the human brain works. We're too complex. We are far too complex of a creature for you to say, okay, if somebody just stands in front of you and talks, have you learned it? Well, you and I all know that that's not the case. If you have kids, you certainly know that's not the case. Now, you can probably remember times in your own career when you went to a class or you attended a workshop or you were in a training and you walked out and thought, gosh, what did I learn? Or maybe a week later, you can't even remember what was taught. But it even goes beyond that. I would posit the question to you, what happens if we learn incorrectly? Then what? What if we take that information and actually do ingest it, absorb it, but it's wrong? I can give you an example of that. It's shoe tying. Did you know that most people in the United States tie their shoes incorrectly? We tie our shoes quite weakly. You can actually watch a TED Talk on this by a guy named Terry Moore. This is some screenshots of the TED Talk. He goes in and describes how most people, not just in the United States, but in Western cultures, are taught to tie their shoes. We are taught to tie their shoes by creating a loop and taking another loop and going over the top and then pulling it together. And then he goes in and he shows why that method of shoe tying is wrong, because it forms a weak knot. It actually forms a knot that will come untied much more often. And as a result of that, most people who tie their shoes that way end up spending about a day and a half extra in terms of time over their lives retying a tied shoe. Well, that's silly. How do we fix it? Easy. Rather than taking those two loops and going the direction that we normally go the other direction. Go under the loop and when you tie it. When you do that, you will tie a much stronger version of the knot. You can watch the video and see how he shows you to do it. But think about what just happened, all right? I just gave you information. It is better information. It's information that will save you time. It will make your shoes, it actually makes the knots look better. But then ask yourself this. If you get up tomorrow morning and you put on shoes that require tying, will you use this new method? For most people, the answer is no. Because you learned to tie shoes when you were what, 3, 4, 5 years old? You've been doing this for your entire lives. You can probably tie your shoes in the dark at this point. Why change what you've already done, that you already know to do? Most people don't do that. See, learning is not just about a transaction. It's not just hearing information and then enacting on that information. It's deeper than that. Learning is about two competing or conflicting ideas that are coming together, and you have to decide which one do you want to take with you? Which one's better? Now, sometimes the one that you already knew before is better, and so you're reinforcing. That's great. But sometimes it's a new thing. It's a new process. It's a new discovery. It's a new pattern that suddenly you go, oh, this is what matters, and I'm going to take this with me. Now, please hear me. You're not different than anyone else. We're all like this. When it comes to learning, we have all, unfortunately, been taught to learn pretty poorly. We've been taught that if a person stands up in front of a group of people and talks, that that's teaching and that those people are learning. Unfortunately, that's just not true. In fact, if you want to go back and see where this started, you can go back to when schools began in the United States. The first districts in the United States took place in Ohio. They were orchestrated by a guy named Elwood Cubberley. He created a lot of these particular districts. In fact, more districts were created by Cubberley than any other human being. Now remember, the school district concept happened back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. That's when we started talking about public school. That's when we started talking about everybody needing to learn. But pay attention very closely to what Cubberley said that the classroom was designed to do. Here's what he said. All focus should remain at the front for the teacher, the chalkboard, and the information, with students in rows, quietly reading books and absorbing information, only speaking when spoken to and only taking breaks when bells ring. Promoting isolation and fear will create the working class that America needs. Our schools were not designed for us to learn. Our schools were designed to teach people how to be good workers. Our schools were designed in an industrial age to help feed the industries. That's why they happened. That was the social engineering that was taking place. Our schools are designed with people in rows so that they feel alone, so that they feel scared, and so that they start to take comfort in the manager at the front by the bells ringing telling them it's time to take a break. They were trying to program workers, not learners. So as we think about that and we now apply that to trainings and workshops and things like that, if we're face-to-face, how do we set those trainings up? I have seen a lot of trainings that look just like a school classroom. They put the manager at the front and the learners sitting in some sort of clustering behind them, and they're just listening and listening and listening. See, just listening to something, just interacting with something is not how you learn something. Let me see if I can prove it to you, okay? In your lifetime, if the researchers are right, you have handled between 50 and 100,000 pennies. All right, you have had 50 to 100,000 pennies come through your grasp at some point in your lifetime. As a result of that, I would think that you would know what a penny looks like, right? You should have a perfect memory since you have been exposed to a penny 50 to 100,000 times. You should know which of these pennies is correct. So let me see if I can ask you to identify the correct one. On the upper left-hand corner is number 1. below that is 6, below that is 11. On the far right-hand corner at the bottom is number 15. Which number is the correct penny? Because only one of these is accurate. So go ahead and write in the chat. Which one do you think is correct? A lot of you saying number 8, number 10, okay, all right. Good, Joanna, good, 15s, a couple 15s in there. All right. I think, no idea, fair enough, Roger. I think we have at least one winner. I saw one person get it right. Number 12. Number 12 is the correct penny. Now, how come you all didn't get that? You should have learned it. You've been exposed to these pennies forever. Well, it's because you're not paying attention. You're not motivated to care. You're not engaged with pennies. Pennies are just noise at this point. They're worth so little. So it's just one of those things people don't pay much attention to, right? And so as you start talking about learning, you got to keep in mind that when we're trying to get people to learn, there's a lot that goes into that formula. There's engagement, there's motivation, there's finding a reason for this. They're saying, hey, this is important for me. There's the juxtaposition of the old and the new, and then figuring out which one's better. Learning is complex. Learning is hard. And unfortunately, people are not very good at it. There's actually a book that talks all about this. It was written by a professor at George Mason who actually says, we got to stop sending everybody to school because people are so bad at learning. We got to try something else. Now, I'm not suggesting that here, but he goes through and describes how people aren't good at critical thinking. People aren't good at problem solving. People aren't good at all the things that teachers say, hey, this is what I'm teaching. Unfortunately, none of that's really proves to be true. Now, why is that? Well, some of it, I think, has to do with the order in which we teach. We do this thing called Tell, Show, Do, Review, Ask, which we're going to talk about in a second. And I'm going to recommend to you, in fact, our courses over the next 2 weeks are going to recommend to you a new process that we start thinking about learning from the perspective of having our students do something first. That students try things, that they attach themselves to attempts at things. So let me give you a couple of examples, and then I'm going to have you do something, all right? So just like I've already had you do something with the bat and the ball exercise, that was our first do moment. Just like I asked you to define learning before you really knew what it was, that was another do moment. Do moments really should abound inside of your classes, inside of the workshops that you're giving, the trainings that you're giving, et cetera. Let me show you how some professors and teachers have done this over time. Let's take math, for example. A guy named Dan Meyer, he's a math teacher. He tries to leverage do first learning like this. He goes into his students on day 1 of a new unit or module, and he says, all right, this is my Nana's best frosting. This is how she loves to make frosting. This is the recipe for making that frosting. Unfortunately, this is how I made the frosting. I screwed it up. I added too much of one ingredient. How do I fix it? Now, keep in mind 2 things. Number 1, the students don't know how to deal with fractions. They don't know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide fractions. They've not been taught that yet. And number 2, we live in a culture where people are actually told that they're not numbers people. That's baloney. That's not true. Anybody can learn math if they want to learn math. But we have people who believe that they can't. They believe, oh, I'm not a numbers person. I'm a words person. I'm better with that. That's just not true. But those 2 people are coming together in the classroom where Dan Meyer puts this up. And you know what those students do? They start trying to attack the problem. They say, well, this isn't a math problem. This is a recipe question. I can handle a recipe question. And so they start trying to figure it out. They start going through it. And eventually somebody raises their hand and says, Mr. Meyer, I don't know how to deal with this fraction concept. How would I add this or divide this or multiply this? How would I do that? And now Dan Meyer, who's the teacher, he's acting more like a consultant, more like a facilitator, more like a guide, more like a moderator. He's helping them in those ways. So doing something first rather than saying, let me tell you how to do it and then go practice. You see the difference? People are now motivated. They've got some skin in the game. They want to know why they didn't get it right or why they couldn't figure it out. Well, now he gives them that information. Let me show you another example from him. Now this is something he does with geometry. There's Dan Meyer, you can actually see him. He goes out and he starts shooting a basketball shot. And he takes a little, takes his phone and video records it. And then he carves up that video into just little, sections so you can actually see it like the ball is strobing in the air. And he shows the students a couple of balls that go in. He shows them a couple balls that don't go in. And then he creates one more. But this time the ball stops halfway. Now, the question being asked here is obvious. Is the ball going to go in? Most students, whether they know geometry or not, they can take a guess. They've seen a couple that did, they've seen a couple that didn't. They can take a guess as to whether or not this ball is going to make it in the hole. But then again, they start to say, well, Mr. Meyer, is there a way we could figure this out without seeing the end of the video? And he goes, well, there actually is. We can start to work with parabolas. We can start to work with an arc. We can start to work with geometry. And so let me help you do that. And so he puts them in these sims that allow them to create parabolas, stuff like that. And now they're doing before he's told them anything. They're figuring it out without him having to say, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, now you try. They're actually saying, I want to try, I'm going to do it, and then they do it. So that old notion of tell, show, do, review, ask, which is great. You want all 5 of those things in your workshops, in your trainings. They're powerful. Our contention that we're going to try to share with you over the next couple of weeks is don't put tell first. Change it around so that do is first. I'd like you guys to do something for me really quickly. I'd like you for just a moment, I'm going to ask you to come off of mute here in just a sec, and I'm going to ask you to spend 10 seconds, just 10 seconds, and I'm going to ask you to say this mantra with me over and over and over again in 10 seconds, as many times as you can get it in. Do, show, tell, review, ask. Do, show, tell, review, ask. As many times as you can in 10 seconds. I'm going to go like this after the 10 seconds is up, and that's your cue to stop, and then I'll ask you to go back on mute. But I want you to encode this in your brains, okay? So with each other, go ahead and come off mute. Everybody come off mute. And you're just going to say it with me. Do, show, tell, review, ask as many times as you can in 10 seconds. You ready? Let's go. Do, show,
tell, review, ask. Show, tell, review, ask. Show, tell, review, ask. Show, tell, review, ask. Tell, review, ask. Tell, review, ask.
All right. Good. Please go back on mute. Please go back on mute. Excellent job. Now, we just used a little brain science, believe it or not, that actually got your limbic system kind of up and running. But you did a really good job there. That is the order of operations that we're going to promote over the next several weeks. And hopefully you can take with you long after these courses are done. We're going to do stuff, then we're going to show you, then we're going to tell you about it. Then we're also going to spend time reviewing what we've talked about before we test anybody on anything. Now, speaking of review, that's unfortunately one of the other areas that we don't spend a lot of time on. The brain scientist who I had a conversation with about this actually said to me, Jeff, in your classes, if you don't review stuff with your students, then what you're telling them is it's not important. Think about that for a second. If you don't actually spend time giving them an opportunity to remind themselves of what you've talked about, you're telling them, don't worry about remembering it, it's not important. Let's take a moment and do that. This process, by the way, is called forced retrieval. So let's try it with you. In the chat, I'd like you, based on our new understanding of the concept of learning, write in the chat what you would say learning actually is. Doing nice, yeah. It's very, I like that it's action oriented, good. Discovery, that's a good way to put it. I like that, David. I like that very much, Joanna. How to incorporate the old and the new. Yeah, taking those approaches and then picking the one that's more valuable. Good. Problem solving. Again, something people struggle with because they don't necessarily learn. They just have stuff wash over them because somebody's talking. Processing and analyzing. Very good. Transformation. Oh, I love that word, Karita. Very good. Transformative. Excellent. That is learning. All right. We talked about people and learning. we're going to talk about that for the next several weeks. Let's move on to poise and confidence. So remember, this particular week is focused a little bit more on the concept of a webinar or of a Zoom class or workshop. Next week, we'll spend a little bit more time talking about the asynchronous nature of an online class, stuff like that. But let's talk about the poise and confidence that goes into a session very much like we're having today. So first of all, I want to encourage you to always think about preparation as one of your silver bullets, if you will, to kind of get ready. I'm going to ask Emma to come off mute here and just share with us just quickly the value of preparing and the importance of what that can do and what preparation probably should look like when you start thinking about a webinar. Emma, can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Sure. Yeah, it's not just preparing, and not to be negative, but it's preparing for things to go wrong, because they always do, right? Especially when there's technology involved. Now we've been knee deep in, doing Zooms, whether it's across our organizations or in sessions like this. And you've all probably seen the memes that are now rampant online about Zoom sessions and things going wrong, kids running in, dogs barking, cats streaming across the screen, those kinds of things. And even today, right? I mean, I logged in, I was on Zoom literally 45 minutes before this call. Audio worked fine. Got on this, didn't work fine. So things always tend to happen. So a few things that sort of I've learned over time is you can't take it too seriously, right? You have to be ready to roll with it and sort of poke fun at it, because it diffuses the situation. Your participants are looking at you as the leader of sort of keeping things rolling. And it always helps if you can kind of, use that moment to sort of, like, this is just how it goes, right? Talk about what's happening. So validating is also important. So understanding when you have this great activity planned, maybe you're going to use a different technology. We're going to talk about a lot of those over the next couple of weeks, and you go to do it and it flops. Being ready and not like worried that if that happens, you can't continue the conversation. Of course you can, and validating it and talking about it can really help. And then being ready to do something else. So the preparation piece, at least for me, is always like, okay, if this video doesn't play, if this piece of technology doesn't work, if I can't, hear people or see people in a specific way, what's the plan B? That always helps, because, if the bells and whistles don't work the way that they're supposed to, at the end of the day, I know that we can have a conversation in some way, shape, or form. So I'm usually always kind of simultaneously thinking through, how could I potentially do that so that people still feel engaged? I've reached my objective, but I've done it in a way that that still is meaningful for everybody who's participated. So those are just a few tips from my back pocket.
So along those lines, thanks, Emma. That's fantastic. Along those lines, I love Emma's question that she asked here at the bottom. Again, if you want to put some of these in chat, they're often very fun to read. What's the worst thing that has ever happened to you on a webinar? If you want, we've had some doozies over the several classes that we've done with this already for NeighborWorks, but we've heard stuff from bathroom mishaps to children, to animals and pets, and just catastrophic technology fails. So you can certainly put some of that in the chat if you'd like, and they're pretty fun. Ordering on the drive-through, nice. That's a heck of a way to hear something happen in a webinar. Oh yeah, oh, home alarm. That's a new one. I hadn't heard that one before. That's good. Yeah, that stuff happens. All right. One of the things that I want to encourage you to consider as the teacher, as the facilitator, as the moderator, is to really consider the concept of focus. You guide the focus. You tell people where to look, what to do, when to come off mute, when not to be off mute, when to add to the chat. You guide the conversation. You guide direction. I don't know if you've seen the video of this. If not, you really should watch it on YouTube. It's fascinating. There's a concept called blind spots, talked about in a book that Kathy Davidson wrote called Blind Spots. But it's about an old experiment that's been done many, many times. And you can see this experiment on YouTube. What happens is a group of people are brought together on screen, and they've got a ball or two balls, and they're asked to basically pass the balls back and forth. And then the viewing audience is asked to keep track of how many times the balls change hands, how many passes are made. And so you're either asked to watch, you know, the people in the white shirts or in the black shirts or the blue ball or the red ball or whatever it is. You're asked to just keep track. During that 60 seconds while that ball is being passed back and forth, a person in a gorilla costume literally walks through the middle of the people passing the ball. And the fascinating thing is that afterward, the facilitators of this experiment will say to people, okay, how many times, you know, did the white team pass the ball? How many times did the black team pass the ball? And then they'll say, and what animal walked through the middle of the circle? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 85 to 90% of people never saw the gorilla. They never saw anybody walk through. They're so focused on the balls passing and counting, they completely miss a human dressed up like a gorilla walking through the middle of that mix. That's called a blind spot. It's really a notion called attention blindness. But what I'm recommending to you is to take advantage of people's focus, and you drive the focus as to where you want it to be. Let me see if I can give you an example of this. I'm going to ask you in just a minute to pick a card, okay? I'm going to show you 6 face cards just from a normal deck. I'm only going to show it to you for 3 seconds. So pick your card and please memorize your card. Remember which card you picked, okay? You're not going to have long, so just pick one, memorize it, and then they're going to go away, and I'm going to try a little magic trick with you, okay? So here are the cards. You have 3 seconds. Pick one, memorize it. Here you go. Okay. Now, I hope that you all picked a card. You've got it memorized. Now, it might be pretty interesting if I could take your card and remove it from the mix, right? That'd be a pretty good magic trick. Well, what if I could do that for all of you? There's 20-some, 30-some people on this call. What if I could take, if I could read your mind and remove the card for all of you? What if I somehow tricked you into all picking the same card? Well, let's see if I did. I'm going to show you 5 cards this time, and I want you to see if the card you picked is missing. Did I get it right? I'm going to guess that I did. Nice. Thanks in the chat for those of you saying I got it. Now, the reason that I got it is not a magic trick. I can't read your mind, and I didn't trick you into picking a card. It's all about attention blindness. See, that trick, I'm about to do what magicians never should do. I'm going to tell you how the trick works, and you can use it if you'd like. Use it on your kids. It's fun. What I did was I showed you these face cards. Notice the Queen of Hearts, the King of Hearts. When I come over here, I took away all of them. I used different face cards entirely. There is no King of Hearts. Now there's a King of Diamonds and a Queen of Diamonds. So there's no way for your card to be there. I removed them all. I'm a total cheater, that's right. That's all about focus. You were focused on the one card, so it was hard to notice all the other ones, so therefore it was hard to notice that they're all missing, but they were all missing. When it comes to our webinars, our trainings, our workshops, you guide people's focus. Tell people what to look at, what to pay attention to, when to act, when to interact, and so as a result of that, I want to make some recommendations around things like Zoom. First of all, when people come in, get the technology issues out of the way before the webinar starts, if you can. Now, I hope that you noticed that when you guys came in today, we were talking to you. We had conversations going, and then eventually you started talking to each other. I didn't even have to see if your audio was working, if your mics were working. I didn't have to see that because you guys were starting to get in and use it. Now, obviously, in this time of COVID, we're all using Zoom more and more and more, so it probably is safer even than it was 6 months ago, but get the technology issues out of the way if at all possible. At the same time, if you're going to share something with people, have it ready. I had my PowerPoint up and ready to go when we started this webinar. All I had to do was turn on my screen sharing and then open up chat so that I could see that. If you have a second monitor, use it. That's great. If you don't, that's okay. But just have your stuff at the ready. If you've got links you're going to share, put them in a text file or a Word document. You really guide people based on having your stuff prepared and then tell them what to look at, what to use. Are you going to use chat? Will you be polling people? Will you be asking them to go off of mute and stuff like that? You guide the experience. So prepare and focus. Prepare and focus. And yes, Carla, we are sharing these slides. These slides will be in the Moodle course, and this recorded webinar will be in the Moodle course. You can go back and you can check it out as well. At the same time, don't forget the best practices associated with PowerPoint. I am a speech teacher. I have heard more freshmen give bad public speeches than you have ever imagined in your life, in my career. But as a result of that, I teach them how to try to use PowerPoint correctly. PowerPoint is misused and abused all the time, all the time. We have some best practices that we know. So for example, let me see if I can kind of highlight some of these. I hope you noticed that when we got together today, we went right into that activity around the bat and the ball. I didn't tell you my name. I didn't tell you much of anything other than we're going to talk about learning, let's go. I gained your attention, or I tried to. Now, hopefully I did. You don't have a second shot at an attention getter. So utilize your PowerPoint in such a way that you have your attention getter, and then set the stage. Then talk about, you know, yourself, what you're going to talk about, your preview, your stuff like that, which goes into the agenda. If you're going to be on this Zoom chat for more than 20 minutes, give an agenda. People want to know where they're headed, what they're doing. They have this mental math that they create inside of their brains. Build in focus shifts. Build in times for them to think about something else, to sort of cleanse their palate, if you will, and then come back to the learning. So to that end, let's try it. Unmute for 15 seconds and let's hear, what is our recipe for learning? Go ahead and unmute. Let's do it. I want to hear it.
Do, show, tell, review, ask.
Do, show, tell, review, ask.
Do, show, tell, review, ask.
Tell, review, ask.
Tell,
Review,
ask.
review, ask.
Nice.
Tell,
Review, and
Nice,
ask.
nice, nice. Good
Show,
job.
tell,
Show,
review,
tell,
ask.
review, and ask.
Go ahead, back on mute. Excellent. That's a bit of a focus shift, right? Focus over here, talk about this now. Let's come back to learning. At the same time, another best practice for PowerPoints, as we've already talked about, make your deck available later. While you're doing that, get people to direct the attention to specific things. If you're in person, did you know you can hit the B key and the whole screen will go dark? And then you hit the B key again and the whole screen will come back? You can draw on a PowerPoint. If you've got a stylus and you want to draw on it, you can do that. You can use the effects to transition in, to zoom out of stuff. So, you know, be aware of all the different sort of capabilities of this tool that you've got and use them. They're there for a reason. At the same time, don't forget some of those other best practices. No more than 7 to 9 lines per slide. No more than 7 words per line is really something you're after. Again, you don't want to give sentences to people that they have to read. When they read them, they're not paying attention to you, they're paying attention to what they're reading. You want to focus their attention. You want to put context around those key words. Get their brains engaged by trying to decipher, why is that word there? Why is that phrase used? Get them thinking about those sorts of things as you go. Now, when it comes to the way that we design our slides, let me see if I can give you a couple of examples of things that really, really matter here. Here's a bad representation of a slide, a really bad one. Way too many words, way too much text. It gets even worse when you put a background behind it like this. You've probably seen slides like this. That is basically unreadable. Now, if you were colorblind, it might be impossible to read. But even for people who are not colorblind, that's a pretty difficult slide to read. Now, you might think, okay, I'll get around that by making it pictorial. Doesn't help when you've got words and lines and picture. And these are really bad PowerPoints, right? Really bad. Let's get a little bit better. Now, I think when you start to talk about the difference between a decent PowerPoint and a great PowerPoint, ironically, you can talk about the difference between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. I mean, look at how Bill Gates sets up his slides. They're okay. They're not fantastic, but they're all right. There's still too much text. I think they're too busy. People are still trying to think about what the slides mean. They're probably not paying much attention to him, but it's not too many words. It's not like it's just a book on the slide. But look at how Steve Jobs does it. Steve Jobs would put up a single image or a couple of words or a single bar graph or pie chart. And he would talk about that for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and then he would go on to the next one. That is something that was really contextual. It helped people understand what he was talking about and what was really trying to be said. So again, guide your audience, facilitate, have them focus on the things you want them to focus on. I know that a lot of you guys, as you do trainings and workshops in the NeighborWorks context, you use forms. Guide people on where to look on those forms. Don't show them the whole form, because you know what people do? They read it. They look at all the stuff that you've got up on that form. Instead, say, okay, we're just going to focus on this little part of the form. And then when you're done talking about that, cover it back up and then go on to the next section, and then go on to the next section. So you really can focus people exactly where you want them to focus based on the things that you're trying to get them to accomplish. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're leveraging other tools too. Not just Zoom, not just PowerPoint. There's other stuff out there as well. Becky is going to talk to you about some of these things in the third webinar. She's going to give you a great list of free tools that are out there that you can start to leverage. But can you just really quickly, Becky, give us a couple of tips and tricks that you use when it comes to tools and some of the techniques that you try to foster in this context?
Sure. So, I mean, one really simple thing that I do is actually just take my notepad on my computer and list out the links to every, activity or something I might direct my participants to, so that it's there ready for me to share in the chat, and I don't have to sort of fumble around and try to find it and figure out how to direct them to the right place. So that's one really simple thing. And then some of these tools that are listed here, like Classroom Screen and Whiteboard.fi, are tools that allow you to sort of manage the classroom, that have built-in timers. You can draw, so it's almost like you're using a real whiteboard with your class, but in a virtual environment.
Again, you're going to hear more tools like that, but the key here, as I hope you're really seeing, you guide the experience. You tell people how to act, how to interact, etc. I love this quote from William Wallace: people just want to be led. That was true back in the 1400s when he said it, and it's still true today. So very quickly, as we transition into our next section, let's do a quick review, all right? In the chat, please type, where should the audience focus during a presentation? Again, if it's important enough to remember, then it's something we need to review. So let's review it. Where should the audience focus? On the speaker? On Jeff Borden. Oh, that's great if I'm here. Where you want them to. Very good, very good. Excellent. And then second, what is learning? Define learning one more time in our new definition of learning, our new understanding of learning. Not that transactional model. What is learning? Using knowledge. That's important. That word use is important. An activity that is done. Problem solving. Good. Good. Doing to get better. Yeah. Using the new versus the old. Very good. Excellent. Excellent. You guys are really picking this up. Okay. With our last 5 minutes, we're going to talk about that model of do, show, tell, review, ask. It's something I call purpose and outcome, all right? Again, we're going to talk about this more during the week and more in the Moodle class, but let's just quickly go through those 5 steps: do, show, tell, review, and ask. When it comes to do, the object here is, again, getting the audience to try something, all right? It is not the old model of, okay, let me tell you how this form works. Let me explain how this form works. Now you guys practice. No. It's instead handing out the form first and say, fill it out. But facilitator, moderator, teacher, I don't know how to fill it out. I know you don't know how. Just give it a shot. Let's see where the sticking points are. Let's see where the difficulties are. So it's getting your students, your workshop attendees, your trainees to try something. What is it you're trying to ultimately get them to do? Start there. Start at the end and then work your way backwards. Can you do what the ultimate goal of this class is? First of all, they'll probably realize they can't, which motivates them to want to know a little bit better. And second, it shows you where the holes are. It shows you where the gaps in understanding might be, that they get some of it, but they don't get all of it. Well, what are the things that they do get? So you don't have to spend your time on that stuff, but what's the stuff they don't get where you can now spend your time? The second element of the do, show, tell, review, ask model is obviously show. Now, in the old world where we could all get together easier, you get on a plane and you could go have a workshop like this, maybe you wanted to show people an interview in this fashion. Can't do that today, but that doesn't mean that we have to stop doing it. We can still show on Zoom. We can show them an activity. You can get your phone and hold it over your desk, or show them how you're doing something, or in this case, show them how you do an interview on Zoom, either in person with you and the other person, or on Zoom itself for both people. So just think about how you translate some of these things as we go. This can be done. Then there's tell. Now, telling is really nice in this format because you can tell people based on what they need to hear, not based on everything. Because remember, in the old model, when you tell first, you have to tell them everything, because you never know what it is that they get and what it is that they don't get yet. When you tell in this model, you can tell based on their needs. You can not only tell them, but you can also use graphics, which we're going to talk about in another session, which is so powerful for the human brain. It doesn't all have to be words. It doesn't all have to be text. Then you can review with them. Now, the picture I'm showing you here is called the forgetting curve. We all have one. We all forget at a specific time on a specific rate. And if you're reminded just before you forget something, you'll remember it a little bit longer. And then if you're reminded just before you forget that, you'll remember a little bit longer. Well, the key in teaching situations, when you want people to remember things, is to help them remember them by reviewing them, by creating those forced retrieval moments. So one last time, really quickly, in the chat, what are the 5 things? What's the recipe? What's the formula that we want to leverage? We're not going to say it out loud now. I'm going to ask you to type it. What are those 5 words, and what's the order of operations that we want to try to follow? Nice. Nice, you're getting it. Very, very good. All right, rapid fire, just as fast. Where should the audience focus on where should the audience focus during a presentation? Nice. On you, that's right. Very good. And then last but not least, one word, just use one word to describe our new understanding of what learning should be. What word would you choose for that? Doing, I like it. Transformative, love it. Experiential, excellent. Unveiling, oh, that's nice. Oh, that's really, I like that. So the veil has been lifted, very good. And then that leads to the last thing that we have, which is ask. We got to test them. We got to see if they get it. We got to see if they understood, if they comprehended, if they can do what we actually asked them to do. There's got to be some sort of output at the end. Do, show, tell, review, ask. That's our session today. Your next steps are to get into the class, where we're going to really expand on all this stuff. We're going to ask you to go ahead and log into the Moodle course. If you're struggling with that, please contact NeighborWorks. You should be registered in there. You should be logged in. We will be in there as facilitators. Once you get in there, please introduce yourself in the networking area. Start to poke around, see what you think. Start to read some of the stuff. There's some videos in there you can take a look at. Please then get in and go into the first discussion and make a post. Respond to the topic and then respond to each other. Tell each other what you think. If you like what somebody said, if you struggled with what somebody said, how you kind of feel that works itself out. Don't forget that by next Monday, you need to complete the assignment, which is a portfolio assignment. So you'll actually create something that hopefully you can take with you and use. And then don't forget, on Monday of next week, same time, there's going to be the closing webinar for course 1. That's going to be led by Emma. So you should again already have that link. We will see you then and there. Until then, I want to thank you guys so much for coming. We will see you in the Moodle course. Okay? Take care, everybody. We'll see you there.
Thank you. Bye-bye.